Is there such a thing as a blower intake manifold? And what does intake manifold runner length mean to your life? Well, you're gonna find out on this episode of Engine Masters. Super science, that's what this episode of Engine Master is gonna be all about. Man, we got some really interesting stuff going on. This is gonna be about, is there such a thing as a blower intake manifold? And what does intake manifold runner length do to the power curve? Now, we've done this before with carbureted setups. We've done the dual plane versus single plane, and we've shown you how shorter runners tend to favor high RPM, longer runners tend to favor a better torque curve. But we've never been able to do it as scientifically as we will with this fast LSXR intake, because we can take the lid off and physically change the runner. We're gonna run this thing both naturally aspirated and supercharged and see what the effect is on the power curve. Now, this is really gonna tell you two things. First, it's gonna sort of educate you on the basics of how these things work and what they do to power naturally aspirated. Second of all, we're gonna find out if any of that actually matters once you pressurize the intake manifold, once we're running boost from that ProCharger centrifugal supercharger. Some people think that there's such a thing as a blower manifold, or that the manifold design just doesn't really matter because you're under boost, so you just crank up the boost and it's gonna make more power anyway, which is in fact true. But we're gonna see if that runner length makes enough of a difference that maybe you'll wanna pay more attention next time you're picking a manifold for your blower. Now, what's the actual victim that we're using here? This is a ATK short block. It's a 408 cubic inch LS3. It's got a stock LS3 head on it. It's got like your generic stage 4 camshaft, like 235 and 50 on the intake. The important part is this fast LSXR intake manifold that we can change the runners on. And of course, we're running the ProCharger D1SC. It's gonna make big boost and make like 850 horsepower. But first, we're gonna be running it in like 540 horse naturally aspirated trim. Our very first test is gonna have long runners in the intake, and then we'll switch them out for these shorties. Let's roll it on the dyno and make some noise. Richard, I blame you for this. This is like a good idea.
I have nothing but good ideas, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that part.
Well, good is in air quotes, I think.
We've done this a million times on the carbureted single plane versus dual plane, which is kind of the same thing. It's a runner length test.
That's the age-old
right.
test.
This manifold is going to be pretty tricky. We can change the actual runner.
Yeah, it's really cool. They got like inters, so we can just put it in and change the runner length.
You invented this, right?
Yeah. Shh, don't tell anybody that.
Okay, so now we're just gonna run this thing for a baseline. You got the long runners in it right now.
We have the long runners in it, which is kind of like, that's a fast manifold, and this is what it would be if you just bought a fast manifold. It's got the long runner in it.
Oh, is that how
the
they
nice
come?
thing about this, though, is it's adjustable, so we can put the small one in later on.
Okay, so we got nothing now but to run it and get a baseline. You've already got it warmed up, tuned up, ready to go?
Let's go, let's make it happen.
Okay. Thing's pretty stout for low compression motor, even at 408.
I know.
It's pretty good.
Man, people should just put LSs in everything.
Man, that could be a new thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if we could influence that. Okay, so the power that we're making with our naturally aspirated 408 with the long runners installed, 549.3 horsepower at 6,200 RPM, and we're making 526.7 pound-feet of torque at 5,100. But look, the curve is kind of struggly here. It's not like as nice and pretty and smooth as I would expect.
You can see how that falls over. That's the runner length.
Is that the runner length?
Yeah, and especially on a 408, this manifold obviously was designed for a 6-liter and kind of below, so on a 408, we start to see that.
Is this what you were seeing when you were baselining the thing?
That's it,
Everything's
that should
happy,
work out good.
copacetic?
Yeah,
okay.
549, that's the number.
Easy enough.
That's our baseline.
Next
Boom.
step, go in there and put short runners on it and make more power up here.
There we go, that's what we hope, right?
Okay.
Let's go.
These guys have all the gas drained out of this thing. Our process here is gonna be pull the fuel rails off and then lift the whole lid off of this thing. But what's really entertaining right now is Richard blowing in that fuel hose.
It's from my siphoning days.
Broken loose.
There we go, here we go. Yeah, ultra sexy.
All right, now we need the torques.
Prise off like so.
Hold it down. There we go. There we go.
Just got to man up, I guess.
From the front to the back.
Look at that.
Got to man up.
That's actually a really cool intake manifold. So what is the actual difference between the runner length that we're seeing here?
3 times.
Yeah, that's quite a bit. So you can see, this is the part that goes up against the cylinder head, and this is the mouth of the port. And you'll notice they're actually bell mouthed more nicely on these red ones because there's room to do that. By the bell mouth, I mean that curve right here, the radiused entry all the way around, which, by the way, is way better for airflow than just a sharp edge. Makes a significant difference.
This is like a child's toy. Do they have the Star Wars one of these?
We got the short runners installed. Here comes the lid.
lid. Here we go.
Take this front guy, there we go. Gotcha.
No más.
Fuel rails. Get it on the injectorators.
Short runners.
Yeah, short runners.
Yeah.
What do you think's going to happen?
I think it's going to make less bottom end torque. It's going to carry the RPM a little bit more.
That's kind of the theory, right?
So see, we don't even need the dyno.
If you could just draw me a curve really quick, we'd be all done, right?
I think we do need the dyno because the dyno is going to tell
gonna
the
tell
story.
us.
Only the dyno knows for sure.
And
No, you know.
because you've already run it.
That's right.
Well, I'm clairvoyant.
Yeah, but don't spill the beans. We want to see it
no.
hot off the dyno.
Good?
Oh, I'm ready.
All right,
Yeah.
let's go.
What just happened?
I don't know. Let's look at the numbers
This
and
can't
find
be
out.
right.
Look at that.
Okay, so this is a much more radical change than I guessed that it was.
Yeah.
It makes a much bigger difference. It threw away the torque curve
Yeah.
and did not pick up the power where it needed to. So basically what this is telling me is that this engine wants something in between, because we didn't like how it rolled over really quickly before with the super long runner, but with the super short runner, it's just killing power everywhere.
Yeah, a shorter runner would definitely be the way to go. The problem
Yeah.
is that whenever you change the runner length, you almost always trade something down here. If you get more there, you're gonna lose it somewhere in here.
So here's what we actually have for numbers. 547 horsepower, and it's up at 6,400 RPM, but there's a little dip in the curve here. Basically, it did carry it on. We'll look at the overlay here in just a second. And the peak torque number, it just threw it away. We used to make 526 pound-feet of torque, and now it's 493 at 5,300 RPM. So that's a disaster. Let's call up the overlay and look exactly
right.
what the disaster is. So these black lines are with the short runners, and man, look at that.
Wow.
Okay, that short runner threw away the torque curve. Gonzo. I have never seen a dual plane intake manifold versus a high-rise
No, it
single plane
doesn't do that.
do it this badly.
No.
This
Normally
is
you see
way
a crossover
worse.
around 5,000 or
Right.
5,500 or something like that, and it's a little bit more here and a little bit less here. But I mean, that's dramatic.
That is hideous. To put the point on this, the red lines here are with the long runner and the black lines are with the short runner. So you can see at every point below 6,400 RPM, it destroyed the torque curve. And then it actually did pull ahead a little bit up at the top. But remember when we ran the long runner, we actually pointed how the curve took a distinct downturn right here? That is the result of that long runner, because look how the short runner carries it out. So that really is a good example of how the short runner favors a higher RPM band. But I guess now the question is,
Does it do the same thing?
with the supercharger.
Exactly.
So that's what we're gonna do next. We're gonna go leave the short runners in there and hook up our Pro Charger. And then after that, we'll go back to the long runners and we'll find out if it's different under boost.
That's right. Does it do this same thing under pressure?
Only one way to find out, guys. Here's just a little quick rundown on the source of our boost. This is a Pro Charger. It's a blower that's been around for quite a long time. It can support up to around 1,000 horsepower, even though it's sized pretty nicely for street engines in more moderate horsepower ranges. So we're gonna get this all set up and we're gonna run the short runners with boost. You've got the supercharger all set up, Richie. All you have to do is put that belt on and a little bit of plumbing, and we're having supercharged power.
That's right, I like this because it's self-contained. We just put the belt on, hook the intercooler up, we should be good to go, right?
Now, what are we doing for pulley ratios here as far as boost? And,
This is the 4.75 pulley, so it's really the biggest pulley that we have, so it's the lowest boost setting. We're not trying to make a ton of power, we just want to show the difference between the intakes, and that's enough.
Okay, slap that belt on and
Let's
I'll
go.
get the intercooler.
Phil.
Oh man, this thing's heavy. I should have given you this job.
No way, I'll take the belt.
Yeah, give me the belt.
No way, man. This is not my first rodeo, Steve. Well, you're the big guy, right?
Yeah, don't you forget it.
You're used to listening to those heavy Mopars, right?
Yeah, that's right, not this lightweight LS stuff. Oh yeah.
Okay, while you guys were installing the blower, I started to think about what we're doing here is different than most of the changes that we make on the dyno. I'm now throwing this back to the naturally aspirated version of the long versus short runner. It's not a matter of more airflow or of a more efficient chamber.
No.
It is super magic.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
The reason it didn't make more power is that it probably never will. See, I was thinking it was going to allow more RPM and therefore allow more horsepower.
Yeah.
But because the airflow didn't change and nothing else changed to reduce, a mechanical drag, friction, anything like that, it can't make more horsepower just by doing that.
When we changed the runner length, some of the long runner was taking up the plenum volume. We have more open area now,
Which I didn't consider that at all.
Yeah, so
Yep.
the big thing I always like to talk about is runner length. When you change the runner length, we see big changes in power. When you change plenum volume, you don't normally see big changes in power. We're just trying to find out if we add boost to this, does it kind of do the same thing that it did when it was NA?
And that's what it comes down to, is that there's
Yeah.
all this science around it, but when you add a blower, does it or does it not affect the engine the same way?
Does it do the same thing?
That's what we're about to do. So right now we're gonna run the thing supercharged with the short runners and the intake manifold. Hit it.
Okay, let's go.
Go. Okay.
All right.
Let's have a look at our power and what boost it took to get there. That was our first run with the supercharger with the short tubes in the intake manifold. Can you pull up the boost curve just so we have a visual
Yep.
for the video? So here's our boost curve. As expected when you use a centrifugal supercharger, it's absolutely linear, rising with RPM because it's belt driven,
Yep.
not like a turbo that can do different things, especially if you start messing with the wastegate. But starting up at 0, ending up with 11.3 pounds of boost, 845 horsepower, 682 pound-feet. So that's really our baseline.
Do you want to look at this curve compared to the NA curve on the short runner?
Yeah, let's see if it's the same shape. So he's gonna call up the curves of naturally aspirated with a short runner versus supercharged with a short runner. So we can see if it is the same basic shape, and it won't be because, it's gonna diverge because of the rising boost curve. But even though they diverge, meaning they're tighter here and wider apart here, you can see that they are the same basic shape, meaning if you did stack them on top of each other, they would have the bumps in the same places. So what is our RPM at peak power now?
We're making peak power at 6,900.
Instead of 6,200. And so adding boost, forcing air through the engine just shoves the thing to be able to run at a higher RPM. Just makes it keep on going instead of relying on the engine's natural ability to actually consume air on its own.
It has to do that
Force-feeding
all
it.
by itself, right?
Right. At this point, we have to go put the longer runners back in the thing and see how it affects the curve. Let's do it.
Go make it happen.
Okay. We got this pretty much buttoned up with the long runners now. We just have to go run it with a supercharger and find out if it makes the same difference as the other difference.
That's
That
two
makes
differences.
sense. It's two differences. What are we about to learn?
Well, we just installed
tell
the
me.
blower, we got the long runner manifold, so we're gonna find out if we continue the theme here.
Okay.
Now,
You're good with that?
I'm good. Go.
the basic internet theory is with boost, manifold does not matter.
That's right. They talk about a manifold being a blower manifold. Oh, this is a good blower manifold, and it's always some short runner
Oh.
fabricated thing, and then they think that other manifolds are not blower manifolds. I'm like, really, the manifold is the manifold, and the boost is irrelevant, but we're gonna find that out.
So let's find out.
All right.
So now we're gonna make our pull with the long runners installed with the supercharger. So call it up, ready?
Okay, so there we have.
There you have it. It lost horsepower, 824 horsepower at 6,700 RPM, down 200 RPM than with the shorter runners in the thing.
Yep.
But we picked our torque back up. We got 702.9 at 5,300 RPM.
Okay, so now here's the question. Are we making peak power higher now with the long runner and boost than we did NA with the long runner?
NA long runner, 6,200, and now it's at 67. So yeah, it's pushing it higher because of the supercharger.
Okay, so do we want to
But-
compare this now to the short runner with boost?
Yes, I think right now we want to compare long runner boost to short runner boost.
Okay.
Okay. So here's the comparison that we were looking for. The black lines here are with the long runners. It's the test that we just made. And the red is with the red short runners in the intake manifold. And you can see it behaved exactly the same way that it did naturally aspirated.
We have a crossover
Yep.
point. The long runners are making more torque down low, less power at the top. But the interesting thing, though, it doesn't look like the difference between the two.
It's not as radical.
Yeah, see, we're only talking about 30 horsepower here out at the very top
Instead of 50.
Yeah.
instead of 50 that as it was NA. So the boost did change that a little bit. And I don't think that this torque differential, let's see, we've got 96 and 44. So
Nowhere near as radical the
yeah,
difference.
so the boost.
It
yeah.
cares less with boost.
Yeah.
Because especially up here when we're seeing naturally aspirated when it fell off so radically, that's when the engine's really depending on
Yep.
all that voodoo packing the cylinder on its own.
Well-
where it is less critical with
Yeah.
boost. It is
No,
forcing it to
that's
happen,
good.
but it has the same tendency
Right.
to put the curve in the same shape.
You know, the interesting thing is it seemed to help the short runner down low and help the long runner up top. Boost did that. I mean, it just brought them all, like, squinched them all closer together.
Yeah.
So it kind of made both of the manifolds better.
So everything's better with boost.
I think that's
Well,
pretty safe to say.
That's a safe conclusion, but it's also safe to say, pick the right manifold, it still matters.
Yeah.
Because like, if you were Mr. Hotshot and you went on and you ordered your parts and you got your short runners and your blower and everything, well, you're throwing away a lot of power under the curve below 6,000 RPM.
Yeah.
Now what we're gonna call up here is a comparison of the boost curve from the long runner in black and the short runner in red. And that's interesting because remember, we're dealing with a belt drive and gears. This isn't a turbo. This is the same blower doing the same thing across the same RPM range. So what the supercharger is putting out in air is the same between these two curves. But this is the important lesson of boost is a measure of restriction to airflow.
Yes.
As evidenced by the fact that here we're seeing more boost on the long runner, which would tend to tell you more horsepower, but this is in fact where the power is going down because net airflow into the cylinder is worse.
People tend to look at it the wrong way. They're looking at it like, okay, I'm gonna look at boost, and that's an indication of power. They need to look at it in reverse. If we look at the power output of the motor and then boost as a function of that, we see that because
Yep.
where one made more power, it makes less boost.
Which comes back to the refrain you and I'll say all the time, more power with less boost. That's what you always
That's
want.
the best combination.
More power with less
Yeah.
boost.
If we could get this down to nothing, we'd be making lots and lots of power.
Yeah, but with the same mass airflow.
Right.
Exactly.
Right, yeah, so that's really fascinating. I learned a bunch on this one. This is great.
That's good stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, my way of looking at it is more of the air is getting into the cylinders rather than being resisted as far as
Just
flow.
hanging around
Right.
in the manifold.
Yeah,
right? Yep.
building pressure.
Yep.
Let's go
Boom.
wrap this thing up so hopefully somebody on the other side of the camera can understand it.
Yeah.
There you go.
I think you.
Because we don't really, we're just faking it for TV right now. I had no idea that that change in the intake manifold runner length was going to throw away as much of the power curve as it did.
It was huge.
That just tells you everything that is going on in the manifold. It matters, and it matters a lot. And I think Richard walked into this test kind of knowing what he wanted to show.
Yeah.
Which was that people walk around the internet all the time going, oh, I got to get the right manifold for a blower. Or the one that I've seen a zillion times, it's, oh, manifold, it doesn't matter, it's under boost.
Yeah, but the general behavior was pretty much the same under boost or NA.
Which is the big takeaway from this episode. The manifold design and its effect on the shape of the power curve is identical, naturally aspirated, as it is under pressure. It really didn't make that big of a difference.
Think about those manifolds for like a roots blower that have runners that are about that
That's
long.
exactly what my takeaway was from this. With a roots blower, the ones that sit on top, they're belt driven, they've got runners sometimes just like literally an inch long or less. It's like a flange with a radius on it, and that's it.
That's it.
I want to build one now that has like some runner length to it and make some power.
We're manifold scientists.
I know. But if there's one sort of general takeaway from this to try and apply it to like your life, if you've got an LS engine that's running under 7,000 RPM, that's of typical displacement, 6 liter, 408 like this one or something, my recommendation would be, if you've got one of these LS manifolds, just run the long runners. Whether you have the mediums or the shorts, you're gonna end up throwing away power on a typical engine that isn't just way outside at the fringes of the way people build stuff.
I think we've determined that.
And we'll determine more stuff on future episodes of Engine Masters. But in between episodes, you know, you can catch up with us on social media. I'm at David Freiberger, he's at Steve Dulcich. Richard Holdner is?
At Richard Holdner.
Imagine that.
Wow.
And so follow us all on Instagram, and we'll see you next time on Motor Trend on Engine Masters. You ever go to the zoo and they throw the monkey a football?
Yeah.
Is that you holding that ratchet?
Dang, he came back, man. He came back strong.